What up, random rockers? Before we get talking to it, apparently on my personal IG, which link in description below, or the only IG I have, decided to do a Lenten resolution as a Catholic called 40 days and 40 riffs in 40 days. So, hopefully sometime after I'm done recording this thing, I want to get to today's riff of the day. So, or at least this will be the only thing I'm going to record. I wanted a couple other plans, but I want to be able to get home in time to do the riff thing. So, you have to prioritize, your routines, I guess you say. But that's what's going on. Let me leave link in description. Link in description to my Instagram should be there. Yeah. Now, Ant-Man and the Wasp. Starring Paul Rudd, Scott Lang, Ant-Man. Some of the same cast. Those the friends of Paul Rudd, the thief friends that became guards in the last movie, aren't involved in this one, which can be kind of a bummer, but I feel like it does. I understand why that isn't the case. Well, it wouldn't surprise me if they could have at least teased them as being hired as bodyguards for him and Hope. I think I got that right. Him and Wasp, basically, which would have been nice to at least done a little bit of something like that. But just so you know, that's there. Most of the cast, and then I think Cassie's played by a completely different actress. That's name escapes me here. But she was fine in this movie. Paul Rudd does his thing. But for me, Kang the Conqueror, played by Jonathan Majors, is great. And we get to see more. And from what we could remember from the second movie involving the quantum realm, Janet had been trapped there for a while. So through this whole thing, we find out a little bit more about what happened to Janet during those 30, within at least most of the background about those 30 years, throughout most of what happens in here. Though the way they kind of just to keep the movie going until she finally has a moment to say something is just kind of annoying. Not really spoiling too much here that hasn't already been said. Though there is something that happened in the second trailer that they shouldn't have revealed because it is at the end, unfortunately. So we'll go with that. So don't see the second trailer if you don't want to get spoiled anything. I think maybe it's for the best you don't, and you just see the first one, because it might make more sense what you're getting yourself into a little bit, I guess, than that. But at the same time, the more serious tone of it, there's a very serious tone from it when they get to the quantum realm, at least. It starts off more like what you'd expect from the Ant-Man films, and there are moments involved in it that have the heist thing. I wouldn't take this film as seriously as you should. I mean, it does what it needs to do to establish Kane, or at least what they do with Kane here, to set up what needs to be done there. But it's also a follow-up movie for Ant-Man, and we do get a setup, and it's also more a setup to finally, also a setup in that regard, to get us to finally understand what happened with Michelle Pfeiffer's Janet Van Dyne. I think that's as to what happened with her. So there's that. And so it's more her than anything. I would say Angelina Lilly's Wasp does not get much to do here as she did in the last movie. And it just feels like it should have just been called Ant-Man Quantumania, unless for some reason you're referring to the original Wasp, that is the Janet Van Dyne, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. More so or less. And it's more that she's just there trying to figure out her family drama with Janet and Hank. Or at least that's what comes off for me. There's those who did, at least even in the first trailer, you kind of already know about MODOK, but you don't know the full story. I'll leave that in the spoiler portion of this video. And the thing about this that everyone is saying, and it lives up to it, it's Jonathan Majors Kane. And as far as, like, I'm in a duality about the whole situation. And honestly, I think, like, my best way to describe, be more, compared to what you're probably going to get out of this video, if you want to find go to other more spoilerish, other spoiler talk based stuff after you've seen the movie, after you've seen the movie or seen this video, I would probably recommend, man, the spoiler talk Christian Harloff had with his Zakow's co-hosts Koei Janru and Winston Marshall, both of which add some points of what could be fixed about this movie, or at least better than what I could come up with, and even sounds better than what we did. Then there's but the way it ends, it's fine, but given this is an Ant-Man movie, I feel like people had an expectation from the way the second trailer was, that there was going to be something specifically major going to happen. I just realized that because Jonathan Majors is in this movie and I said major. Anyways, also, his performance in this movie makes me realize I should have just said screw it and found a way to watch Creed 2 while I can before I go see Creed 3, because I actually want to see how Jonathan Majors' role as Damien in Creed 3. I'm actually curious. Like, holy crap. And then there's also something else that's kind of happened here that's also very interesting. There's other things that like, even the trailers kind of spoiled a certain cameos that do happen. Bill Murray is in this movie. I won't say too much more until the spoiler portion, but overall, I'm going to say this. For the Ant-Man movies, and Peyton Reed being the one that's kept going with these, I'm going to say Ant-Man, Ant-Man Quantumania, Ant-Man&TheWasp Quantumania, Ant-Man&TheWasp. And despite what might be some issues I may have with this movie that you would think would talk me out of saying the ranking I just had for these Ant-Man films, I still will hold up to it. I'd say its level of entertainment is about as equivalent to the frustrations I do have with it. Nothing in a way that makes me... But I feel it works, and for what it is, and it has its issues, and I feel I may have to just get into the spoilers now, or else you'll never understand it, which is in 3, 2, 1. So this movie starts off, Janet in the quantum realm, dealing with whatever creatures that are involved in this area, which I forgot to mention in the non-spoiler. Beautiful set. This setup is beautiful. There's clearly Peyton Reed's time working on, like, Mandalorian and stuff, and finally doing some Star Wars stuff. Definitely he was able to take inspiration in his influence in Star Wars and showcase it here, but in a way that clearly that's designs and styles feel like a better version of what apparently Strange World is, from what I gathered from the trailers, at least, of that movie, that I hear is not that great for Disney animated movie, and is a little too on the nose about its politics and stuff. Luckily, this movie isn't exactly that, but it does everything to set up how Kane is, the Conqueror here is, and that she first meets him, and they try to help him with this machine to help him and makes a deal that she would get him home and stuff. And then it turns to help him, or at least that's the first time you meet him. And then you eventually start with going into Paul Rudd stuff in the real world, and the scene that's basically in the beginning of the trailers, or at least the first one. That's basically what you get, and you see Cassie's. A lot of what this, and even with the way they were starting to kind of set things up in this movie, you would almost feel as though the way they set up in this movie, in the second trailer as well, not just the way they did the ending thing, but in the second trailer, they made it seem like Majors was going to make a deal with Ant-Man on giving him back his time with his daughter, but it turns out what I guess was said in the trailer either never made the cut, or it was really more referring to his deal with Janet for helping him try to rebuild his machine, which they did like take 20-something minutes in this movie to finally get Janet to finally explain everything and give some proper exposition. Once they finally escaped the whole situation with the Bill Murray character, who was a friend that apparently they did a joke about how apparently him and Janet were a thing for those 30 years and tried to fight against Kane after he found out he basically conquered all these other timelines, and he's basically at war with the other Kane members of the Council of Kane, who basically exiled him in the quantum realm. And of course, him trying to escape, she finds out from touching the thing, which his mind is connected to, and so he's technically reading its mind through this thing, I guess. Whatever MacGuffin you got with that, but there's also a character involved in this that reads minds and stuff, and there's so many things they could have done with him and plot points that they didn't give enough to. Katie O'Brien's role as the lead chief of these people, that apparently you drink this one goo and somehow it becomes in this area, and it becomes a way to be a translation thing to allow the person who drinks it to hear the language of everything and be able to speak it to speak their language or something. It basically works like the Tons of Fire, but it's red goopy stuff that seems to come from a certain particular creature that has a weird joke about holes. It's weird. It's weird, but I laughed more about those things. I slightly snickered more about it. I barely laughed in this movie, yet for some reason I was okay with it. Once we got into Quantum Realm, I was kind of more immersed in what was going on with how the world was set up, some of the things that are of the Quantum Realm, lore and stuff, and the whole thing that they kind of lure back to with the ants, the smart ants that, or the technology advanced ants that Hank created earlier in the movie. We find out more about Cassie. Apparently he has wound up in jail, and turns out she's kind of taken up her father's mantle as a young thief in and of itself, but is trying to do things but is more trying to be inspired by what he's done from what he did through the previous films, I guess, or at least what it seems Janet and them have told him. Kane and his motivations in this movie to try to get out and do his thing, at least the way Jonathan Majors portrays him is fucking, like, the moment he's on the screen, without even saying a fucking word, is just immaculate. He really, this Kane really is a great villain in of itself, and I'd hope whatever this is translates to what will eventually be of him in some of the later films in the phases. And given the way this movie I like it. I get it. It's an Ant-Man movie, and there's some absurdities of what is the Ant-Man movies we've had, but it's also sort of being juxtaposed by what Jonathan Majors is bringing about Kane, and how the post-credit scenes involving that both involve Kane in some way that are really nice. The mid and the end credits specifically. And they do what they can with the ending of this movie that I think is all right. I get some people, if you're a sadist, I guess, and wanted someone to die, okay. But I was fine. It didn't bother me like it did everything else, as long as they set up. I had a feeling it was going to work itself out because Cassie's created the damn signal thing, so I knew that was going to happen. And the thing that is kind of going to be bothersome, that will truly make or break your experience with this movie, is what they do with MODOK. And the big reveal that it is essentially Corey Stoll returning as Darren, and what happened to him after he was basically banished into the quantum realm. To him from the events, say a Yellow Jacket from the first movie, coming back, and how they handled him here. It's a different character thing, but the way his character seems sort of kind of like what you expect from MODOK, but it's gonna make or break some people. I'm not a huge MODOK fan, so it's to the point where I just, like, even at the moments, like, the only death scene we got was him. And I was kind of just, wasn't even laughing at the scene, the one scene that I should be laughing at morbidly, with his death scene. Like, I didn't even care about this character. Like, if he was even in it, that'll make or break some people, but it didn't completely break me. Because if it did, Kane's performance wouldn't be so great. It's so great, it makes up for that bullshit so much. But it kind of works, but since it's in the quantum realm, I guess it kind of works better here than if it was. And the joke, and they kind of pull the Guardians Galaxy 2 joke they did with Taser Fist with him, of like, what the with all the other characters, the main characters with it that have seen him and know about him from the first movie, and it's like, the fuck, dude? The fuck happened to you? So you kind of get some chuckles out of it, but it does get old after a little. But I mean, it doesn't get old for the chuckle factor, but I understand if you're not gut busting after a while. And I didn't really gut bust. I was actually, because of, I guess, the second trailer, I was more invested in what I've already heard about Kane. I was more invested in seeing about him and invested in the Ant-Man and the Wasp part. I was invested in the more Quantumania and Kane the Conqueror portions of this film. And in that regard, I think it fucking delivered. I do think it also adds a detriment to the rest of the movie that it's surrounding itself with. And it does sort of, round the end portion, slightly hurt because of the third act. The third acts are pretty solid. And it's the final act, which is fine. But for what it does to Kane, it slightly hurts him, but not really necessarily. I mean, he does sort of get Ark of the Covenanted with the time orb thing. But which is fine, but I feel like there's so many things they could have fixed, but I feel like like I said, the Capes and Cows spoiler talk and which is the thing, will be where are the two sides of where I'm going with this, because I still like this thing in the same way as Jay, and understand it's just an Ant-Man movie, and I guess Kane was done super extremely well that it just kind of overshadowed the rest of the rest of the cast, and made you kind of fear for Ant-Man and the rest of them. And you could tell he was a guy that you don't like. He was like the way he portrayed him, he may as well have been not just a conqueror, but a fucking pimp. It's like, the way he was like, what? It's like, I'm not going to ask again, motherfucker. Like, Like, he's on some Black Dynamite shit, but less, but not over the top goofy. It's just right, you know? Though I have a feeling they might pull he might pull a Black Dynamite in other versions of Kane, but we'll see how that goes. But because of the way of him being in so many movies coming this year, I don't know if we're gonna get burnt out on him. I'm hoping not, and I hope that, and we might get burnt out on him as Kane. I don't know. But so far from what this version is, if any of the other versions, or at the least can be taken as seriously as this version of Kane, I'm set. I'm set for him for Kane. I'm looking forward to Kane Dynasty then. In that regard. And more so, fucking Loki Season 2. Since he will be the primary villain focus to build into it. And they set up, and they finally did something right. And had something in here to set up for that series. Because they've barely, in the movies since Phase 4 started, tried to even remotely properly tie things in with these mid to end cred scenes to the shows to make them feel connective and relevant enough. And it almost seems like the most closest thing was, of course, that seems to have worked clearly is Loki Season 2, at least in Season 1. And now Season 2, I'm more hyped for it. And I feel like the people who are Loki fans and are fans of that series I may lose its relevance after Season 2 exists, if you've already wound up seeing that before you see this or something. I feel like it does actually make sense to have seen Loki Season 1 before you've seen this. Or at least know about what happens in Season 1 before you see this. That's for sure. And I do like how they set him up with that. The bouncing off between him and Michelle Pfeiffer is brilliant. And you do see the Councils of Kane, and there is other multiple versions of Kane that you're gonna spot. One that actually is the original comic book designed Kane, which is sort of blatantly obvious. Not blatantly obvious the first time you see it, instead of deeply hidden or something as an Easter egg, which was cool. But just the way it came across and how some of them came off that were in the Coliseum looking thing, some of them came off frat boyish, that was kind of head scratchy and just felt off with the CG thing. So that one didn't work as well as I think. It does enough to give you the idea of the threat, but it's in execution, it doesn't come off as well as I think they wanted you to think. Luckily, the scene set up for Loki Season 2, where we kind of meet a version of Kane from some 1800s version of him or something. Some pre-noir, basically. I don't know how to put it. Victorian times? I don't... how do I put this? Like the pioneer eras as a scientist, and which was interesting, this variant, or if it was a version of him, of the Kane the Conqueror we did meet from the past. I'm pointing in the past that discovered it. I don't know. That's not for sure, and we won't fully find out what kind of variant he is of Kane until we see where this scene fits in when they probably show it in Loki Season 2. So, which is exciting. I was kind of like, all right, finally, there you go. That's a crit scene. That one was more interesting to me. So I was very excited about it. So now I'm kind of, at the very least, if you come out of this movie, you will just be excited to see Loki Season 2. For sure. Sure. And we're trying to figure out what they're going to do about the Kane, because with the whole Kane Dynasty thing and how they're going to handle that situation and how that's supposed to lead eventually into Avengers Secret Wars. And from what I'm hearing, Feige is trying to hold off on unleashing so many shows after what happened, how things were handled in Phase 4, which is probably for the best. Hopefully the Daredevil thing will still be a thing, because I'm looking forward to that, despite the one thing that involving She-Hulk, and it's a shame with that, like, that whole thing. The one thing that was the Daredevil, and possibly if they did do a season 2, we might have got to see more involving Scar, or maybe we'll see more about Scar in a coming film. So I don't know. I'm looking for, I do like how they deal with the way the technology is, combined with the organic materials and everything, and how he adapted and conquered this entire, and how they tried to fight him, and apparently he betrays them and winds up helping out Kane instead, because he left and gave him no choice. So, and you barely see him and Bill Murray after that. It's merely just a cameo because it's fucking Bill Murray, which is fine. If you want a better one, just watch Zombieland. Or possibly that's what happened in the second one. Though I'm hearing that's not nearly as good as the first Zombieland, but it's here nor there. So, and the whole thing with the ants attacking him, there's a way they could have done it to where this version, they could have seemed like the weaker version, even though, of Kane, so that it would make sense how he's in an Ant-Man film when he could easily wipe the floor with him, but the only way he probably wouldn't is that they could have done an explanation of quantum physics or something to kind of make sense why his beams weren't working, his beams that were able to annihilate everybody else around weren't working on them because of their suits or something with the what it does in the identification and everything. Just kind of, I guess they could have done something with that, but they just didn't explain anything enough. There's like, it's flawed, but I still like it for what it is, and for what it is as a setup. And it makes me interested in Kane. Move forward, hoping that these other versions of Kane are at least willing to bring a sense of menace and threat that he does in this movie, at least within the first 2 acts. And there's just some jokes that don't land. But for the most part, the ones that do, that's just so dry. It's just kind of more dark and dry humored. And to hear Paul Rudd wasn't involved in the writing as much, or production wise, or writing of this film for the jokes as much as the previous ones. It's probably because they were probably more focused on trying to do what Feige wanted them to do to set up for Kane and all this other stuff. And the way this comes off, people were going in expecting this to be a bigger deal because of Kane and what he set up for Kane Dynasty. And Kane himself lives up to the hype. But the rest of the film it's surrounded in is just what you kind of expect from an Ant-Man movie a little bit. But I don't think the jokes land as much because they're so dry, because it's trying to do what it can to kind of juxtapose, and some of them are kind of chuckle-worthy, but they don't stick the landing for me as much. But what they do in the first 2 acts within the world they're building of the quantum realm, and what they do with Kane and all his thing, was just, like I said, it was just awesome. And I wish it could be better, but it's an Ant-Man movie. I can't complain about it. I can't be allowed to complain about it, really. It's just more the fact of the way the second trailer set things up. And they do show something at the end, and they finally give Wasp the chance to. But when it should have really been Janet, to be fair. But they had to give Wasp something, I guess, important to do, and that was him coming in to help so they could give the purpose of Ant-Man and the Wasp, I guess, to help him like defeat Kane, this iteration of Kane. And so, and they could have set it, and maybe they could have set it up that he's technically sort of a weaker version of the other Kanes, but if that were the case, this being exiled, I don't know. But overall, I still like this. I mean, I didn't give a grade before then. I should have, and I just like, it's more a light thumbs up, not a heavy one. I'd say maybe give it I'd say it's more worthy of a matinee. At the very least, a matinee, at least go see it in a matinee or like for a $5 deal or something. You don't have to rush out unless you want to avoid spoilers, but that's about it, you know. Spoilers on the internet, but if you can't avoid them, you know, like I have issues with, so that's kind of what I feel about this overall. I like it, but I don't love it. And I wasn't really expecting to going in, so I was already tampered, and even I guess my tampered ones weren't quite fully met, just meant enough that I can at least say my experience. I feel like my rankings for the Ant-Man movies is still justified. So, yeah. And if this still doesn't explain enough and you want something more articulate, like I said, articulate of where I do feel about things in my duality towards this movie, on the positive leaning side, go to Jay Washington. On the more closer to negative leaning side, if you want to, like, and having an understanding of what to fix, that would be more interesting than what we technically did get in this movie. Because they did set up something to make it seem like I said, with Ant-Man, that it was for Ant-Man, but it was really for Janet. But, yeah. That's kind of my thoughts on it, guys. What did you guys think of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania? I know this is late, and I was hoping to hold off for somebody, but things happened, and I couldn't do that. Plus, because March coming up is going to be stacked, movie-wise. And though I'm willing to I still like it enough to be willing to see it again with my said significant other. But if she wants to still see it, go ahead. I'm fine with that. You know, I still think it's a good popcorn stuff, at least for being a blockbuster that it is. It's still a good popcorn stuffer. That's why I at least give it a matinee for that. But it's not nearly as high stakes as it could have been. But for what they do and what they do to set up to at least give it that, still bring a heist sense of things like they do with the other films to be in here to a degree, but it's a very small sliver of it. It's there. So, and that's, I guess, most of my thoughts, even if it's all jumbled up and everything. But what did you guys think of my video? What did you guys think of my thoughts on this? What did you think of when the Wasp Quantumania? Leave a comment below. Let me know. As always, guys, keep it random, keep it real, keep it rocking. I will see you next video. Take care, y'all.